Chapter 11 Mimic. Monique jammed her fingers up one jacket sleeve. Empty. Dreams, fog slipped back, and she remembered dropping her switchblade when the Grey Maiden had grabbed Karen. It was gone, but her hands couldn't seem to accept that. Sorry, Annie was yelling at me. Okay, I'm coming back. Two of the creatures crawled down the walls, their thin gowns draped over backward bent legs. Drooping hoods shrouded their faces. Unlike the Grey Maiden, their arms stretched bare from their trunks, the flesh dotted with feather-like bristles. They crept across the stone in rigid, jerking movements, their talons scraping sparks in the air. At every flash, wild amber eyes shone in the dark. Monique darted from her sleeping corner and into the palace hallway. Another figure slinked in the shadows to the right, driving Monique to spin around and slam her shoulder against a corner. Static tingling replaced her skin. She couldn't stop. The creature's hands were already reaching for her through the doorway. She knew it. There wasn't time for gentleness. She hurried left of the door. Far down the hallway, another shadowy figure crept down the wall between two fungal-lit windows. This one meant to cut her off. A doorway opened in the wall opposite the windows, where a stairway drifted down. Monique took the steps two at a time and plowed into a larger hallway. The ceiling hung high overhead, and indistinct symbols carved the walls. She didn't have time to inspect them for clues on reaching the throne room. Talons scraped in the stairwell behind her, urging her onward. Yet another Monique-sized creature slipped through a window ahead. Her gown billowed around her feet, one slender sickle claw poking up from the rumpled cloth. How many of them were there? The palace basement might have been full of sickle-clawed pests in place of New York's usual rats and spiders. Monique didn't slow. If these creatures caught her, they might do to her what they had done to Lady. Blood glistening in elevator light would not look so different from blood glistening beneath luminous mushrooms. A cool draft slipped through the tall, glowing doorway beside the windows. Monique darted under its wide stone arch and out into the open underground cavern. A small patch of flat rock spread from the base of the palace and beneath the caps of enormous, glowing mushrooms. It ended at the shore of a vast subterranean lake. There was nowhere to hide between the exit and the shoreline. The air was so chilly that it drew out Monique's breath in wispy white puffs. The water had to be even colder. Behind her, 6 creatures crept through the immense palace doorway, their shadowy gowns seeping from the darkness itself. Outside those dimly lit halls, their jerky, deliberate movements seemed eerie and dreamlike. Some crawled on the ground, others walked on 2 birdie legs, with their backs hunched like the Grey Maiden's. Monique stumbled, tripped, and sprawled forward. She hadn't been watching where she was going and couldn't have seen any jutting rocks, tricky as distended sidewalk squares. Her knees slammed into the ground beside a mushroom's stiff stalk. Every joint screamed. Ooh, the hoot was higher and flatter than the Grey Maiden's. A dark shape slinked alongside her on all fours. Monique could hardly make out the eyes anymore, only the vague movement of a head and limbs within the hooded gown. The creature pressed one knee hard against the ground, mimicking Monique's position. Ooh. Monique reached ahead, trying to crawl away. The water had to be freezing, but maybe they would hate it more than she would. The creature reached the same arm ahead. Ooh. Another 2 creatures crept behind the first. The rest shuffled closer, their sickle claws plodding at hard earth and upturning small stones. Their talons closed in around Monique's face and limbs. She froze mid-crawl. The creatures might as well have held her switchblade to her throat. A hand slid up the back of her jacket, cold and clammy. Another hand pawed at her neck, its talons tearing threads from one of her scarves. The creatures patted at her shoulders, legs, arms, hair. One drew damp fingers down her face, their talon tips teasing at the corners of her eyes, the edges of her nose, past her round cheeks and soft chin. Another creature's talons snagged Monique's beanie and tugged it off, exposing her hated brow. She almost snatched it back on instinct, but she remembered Lady's shrieks and the quiet that came after they were cut short. One wrong move could turn these creatures from curious to lethal. Their pawing became desperate, insistent. Ooh, the first one cried, and the others echoed, ooh, ooh, as if they needed to ask a question but didn't have the words. At last, one hand fell away. The other slid off, some reluctant. One set of talons dragged faint scratches down Monique's jacket sleeve and pierced the denim, leaving cross hatches to the marks she'd made herself. She tried not to flinch. Their gowns slid past her, the creatures crawling and shuffling toward the lake. It became indistinct, a great mass of flowing garments and bristly limbs. The first one, who mimicked her, remained at her side, waiting. Ooh. When Monique stood shakily, so did the creature. They came to about the same height. Monique tilted her head and watched the creature do the same, mimicking every movement. Ooh, Mimic asked. Monique nodded. Ooh, she said. She had to still be dreaming. At her first step, her knee cried out and began to sag. She tensed her thigh muscles and pressed the other leg hard into the ground for balance. If she fell, so would Mimic. Monique had a responsibility now. She swallowed a laugh. Given time, she would end up haunting this place too, another lost creature, doomed to crawl through the palace halls and call ooh into the darkness. If she gave in and became part of this place, at least then she could sleep. Maybe her terrible hunger would subside. Her next step felt stronger than the first, and walking became easier after that. Her knee no longer caring that it ached. Mimic stuck to her side, only stepping when she did. Mimic's sickle claws breached the bottom of her gown, but they didn't feel like weapons now, only parts of her body. Her sister creatures led on. Monique wasn't certain about following them, but they kept looking back. She was expected. She and Mimic followed toward the water. The lake was not empty. Its shoreline narrowed to a slick stone bridge rising scant inches from the water's surface. Mimic's sister creatures grasped its side as they crept out onto the still water. Their drooping gowns dragged at the surface, wetting the hems. At the bridge's end, an indistinct structure climbed from the water. The cavern's eerie light reflected across its surface, painting the illusion of a night sky. The water reflected the structure, and its black glass surface reflected that reflection. Two warped mirrors held too close together and distorting all clear perception of the structure's design. It was a pyramid. It was an inverted pyramid. It was something of a sphere, too, and yet it seemed to have no absolute shape, its curling arms reaching in all directions. For all Monique knew in daylight, it would have looked as square-shaped and mundane as her old apartment building. But this was the underground, where reality twisted to the worm's will. Monique stepped onto the bridge, Mimic at her side. Water dripped from the ceiling and into the lake. Nothing else disturbed the surface. The other creatures slinked up to the black glass structure, the reflections cast and multiplied 1,000 times across its surface before a tall doorway swallowed them. An odd scent breathed from the opening in their place. Monique had never smelled anything like it before. Not unpleasant, but unnatural in ways she could understand, like bathing a newborn baby in embalming chemicals, the wrong mix of life and death. Mimic's head craned toward the structure, eager to follow her sister creatures, yet unwilling to abandon Monique. Their footsteps fell muffled on the black glass. Monique's face appeared briefly across every surface, and it was strange seeing herself without her red beanie. One of the creatures had stuffed it inside her gown. Monique had a feeling she'd never wear it again. Her reflections vanished as she and Mimic crossed the threshold of the black glass doorway. The structure was either built as a single room or split into a million, the insides more complex than any hall of mirrors. Mimic's sister creatures melted into their reflections, the 5 of them replicating across glass until gowns, limbs, and talons echoed over every surface. Gnarled pillars jutted 10 feet off the floor, each a bend of black glass and stone. A throat cleared. It didn't sound like the creature's shrunken hoots and didn't come from where they crawled on the walls. The sound came from the room's center. Shouldn't you be piercing the universe? A dry voice asked. Someone sat up from the floor and lifted her head to meet Monique's gaze. Karen.